Well, thank you for the very kind introduction. Thank you for the opportunity to present here. I love coming to Denmark. My mother's actually Danish, and my family's from just outside of Copenhagen. My father's side, the Smalley family name, of course, English, but I love coming to Denmark because of at least half my family roots are from here. Several months ago, John asked me if I'd be willing to present at this year's conference. I'm very pleased and honored to accept that responsibility. I wish I could present in Danish. Sadly, I cannot. I could do it in Japanese, but I think that would probably be worse. We'd need another translator and just add to the confusion. I really like the theme of the conference, and this is, I think, why John invited me to present. Results through stability. That is one of the things I believe in most of all. Results and stability. Those are key ingredients for success in any type of organization. And we jokingly kind of call this one of the secret ingredients of Toyota. Actually, it's not a secret, okay? But I will explain how literally they worked on this for about 20 years. Okay? Now, that's good news and bad news. The good news is it's not that secret, not that difficult. The bad news is you don't get 20 years. I give you 2, okay? You have to be better than Toyota, but you get to go second. So the outline today, again, we've already covered my background a bit. I'll touch upon it briefly, but then I want to jump right into TPS, what we call basic stability, and the importance of achieving results, and then factually what Toyota did in the early days. Okay, it's a little different from what you'll read in some of the books. And then time allowing, of course, I want to, at the end, hold question and answer with you. As Christian mentioned, the most unique thing about my background, I did spend 10 years of my life living in Japan. I speak, read, and write Japanese, including my college years, and work for Toyota. I spent literally from the time I was 20 until 30, 21 until 31, living in Japan. And I was just lucky. I did not plan to work for Toyota Motor Corporation. It was a complete accident. They just came recruiting on the campus I was at in Japan. Magically, I still don't understand why or how, I got selected to join the company. And then even more magically, I got to work in this wonderful place called Kamigo Engine Plant, which in Japan is famous. I did not know that when I joined it, but it's Taiichi Ohno's engine plant, which he built from scratch. And it wasn't the original plant where he started doing his methods, but it's considered the most refined example of their production system and sort of the model. It's been the decades for the model of TPS internally at Toyota for a long time. I left Toyota in my early 30s. I wanted to come back to the United States. I took a position as a director, so like many of you, I was in this position where I had to direct improvements. Donnelly was about a 5,000 person company, about $1 billion in sales when I left, and had plants both in Europe and North America. My initial thrust was working with the 8 plants in North America, and we were actually pretty terrible. If you read any of the history, this is back in the 1990s, mid-1990s, we were actually pretty terrible. We were called one of the worst suppliers to Honda, for example. They ranked their suppliers, top to bottom, and we were considered in the bottom 10. They called us. There were actually 12 consistently in the bottom 10, and they called us part of the dirty dozen, and that's not a good thing to be. But the nice thing is, after 5 years, we were given their Supplier of the Year award, #1 multiple times for our commodity grouping, and we had a lot of very impressive accomplishments that we were proud of during that time. I went to a big consulting company for a few years. It didn't work very well for me. Didn't enjoy it. But it gave me a taste of consulting, and I decided that's what I want to do. I don't want to do it in a big company. I want to do it on my own. So as Christian mentioned, back in 2002, I started my own company where I can pick and choose clients to work with, write articles and books, accept speaking engagements like this one, do training improvement workshops, and do lots of other fun things. The most recent of which is starting something called the Lean Leadership Academy with my colleague who's here today, Sam McPherson, and he'll talk a little about some of that this afternoon. But this presentation is entirely available for download. I made some tweaks last night. Of course, last minute changes, we always modify a few things, but it'll be available for download if you haven't downloaded it already. So the real thing I want to talk about is this notion of what do I mean by stability here? The slogan here, results through stability. What does Art Smalley mean about this, and why is it important to Toyota? And first I'll step back, okay, a little history, because Toyota production system is not new. Toyota's been around a long time, and their production system's been under development for quite a long time. It really got going in the 1950s, which I'll describe. And the more remarkable thing about Toyota, they had 50 consecutive years of growth and in profitability. And very few companies have matched that track record. And of course, in 2009, they had a very bad quality problem and a series of devastating issues that hit the company, including earthquakes and tsunamis and various things that for a couple years, Toyota had really bad years. But actually, they've done well. Again, in 2013 and 2014, their net income, just looking at profits, is back to record levels. So they've bounced back quite nicely on the profitability front, and their quality is returning to the forefront of where it used to be as well. And over the years, like I said, it's not new. If you go back, many people have been discovering Toyota for a long time. And it kind of bothers me. Okay, we've been discovering it for a couple decades now, and I joke, we're doing something wrong. In the 1970s, we call it QC circles, and then for a while in the 80s, it was called the Kanban system. For a while, it was, the Japanese have special teamwork, that's why Toyota's successful. In the 1990s, it was all about Kaizen events and things like that, and then suddenly the buzzword in 2000 became value stream, and then people started writing, well, they've got special DNA, they're different, the company DNA is different, and now we call it the Toyota way, the Toyota Kata. And I don't think the descriptions are working very well. In fact, I'll argue it doesn't matter what you call it. At the end of the day, you have to get results. I don't care what you call it. I don't really care how you do it. I think that's going to depend differently, case by case, facility by facility. What I care about is, do you get results? Okay? That's what matters. If you don't, this is waste. This is muda, as they call it in Japanese. You have to get results for your situations. And the truth is, the sad truth is, we don't talk about this a lot at conferences, that a lot of companies in North America are not successful copying Toyota. They try and adapt the patterns, the methods, the techniques, and by one measurement, again, the data supplied by the Shingo Prize Institute out of Utah State, that only about 15% of companies attempting lean for a long period of time can show demonstrated success over a 5-year period of time. About 1 in 7, about 15%. Now, I'm not privy to the actual details of their database, but I tend to believe it. It kind of confirms. I get to visit hundreds of companies in my business over a several-year period, and that's about what I see too. The companies like Lego, we heard a great success story, Lego, and we'll hear some more success stories today. That's about the 1 in 7. Right? Sadly, that means 6 in 7, or about 85%, aren't doing as well as we'd like. They improve for a while and then flatten off, or they improve for a while and start going back down. And of course, we don't present those companies at conferences. But the sad truth is they exist, and part of my goal, with the remainder of my life, I'm 49 now, in the next 15 years of my working career, I want to make this situation better somehow. If I don't, I'll feel like a failure, even though I can't control what companies do. A 15% improvement rate is not acceptable to me, given this way they're defining and measuring the data. So one thing, again, I don't have the answer why. Nobody does. Anybody who says they have the answer to that is probably trying to sell you something, by the way, okay? Be careful. But I do know one thing that bugs me as a Toyota Motor Corporation employee. Nobody really goes back and studies what Toyota did in the beginning. Nobody really does, and not in any detail. They write about Toyota today, the Toyota way of 2010, the Toyota Kata of 2010 or something like that. But I'm more curious, intellectually, I'm more curious about what they did in 1950 when they were terrible. What did they do when they were screwed up, like my plants were at Donnelly? We were not good. We had quality problems. We had on-time delivery problems. We had shipping problems. We had morale problems. We had every problem you could think of. So I spent some time. The advantage is I do speak and read and write some Japanese. I've invested my time over the years in making a couple trips to Japan, buying every book I can in Japanese. I've invested a small fortune in rare books in Japanese that are no longer in print, and going to the Toyota archives and trying to study this topic the extent I can. And the thing that is actually striking is that the TPS development time frame is actually longer than even I realized. It's really not just 1950 forward. That the Toyota business is famous for looms. Okay, they started making spinning and weaving looms back in the late 1800s, and then incorporated some of the companies and some of the products in the early 1900s. And that's been going on now for over 100 years. This company, and actually some of the roots of TPS, have actually over 100-year history. And the famous part about it that most people talk about is this 1950 to 1973 period when Mr. Ono was vice president of manufacturing. That truly is where most of the production system did develop. But it's not that simple. I started taking dates out of books and plotting. I tried to see, okay, what did they do when? I just want to understand what Mr. Ono did when from 1945 to 55, 55 to 65, 65 to 75, 75 to 85, seeing if I could find a secret magic answer. I did not. And here's what I mean by that. Take something like setup reduction. Oops. Sorry, go back. Over here, setup reduction. In 1950, there was a 1 to 4 hour setup time. 1950, 1 to 4 hour setup time, depending upon the size of the machine. They have some 100-ton machines. They have some my gigantic, 1,000-ton type stamping presses. And the changeover time on that was 1 to 4 hours, depending upon the size of the machine. Well, by 1962, they got that down to 15 minutes. But it isn't what you think. I'll show you some slides and pictures later. They actually did that a lot more through technology than people realize. They bought new machines, new equipment. A little bit of cheating, but they also did method-based improvement. They also continued working on it, and up until 1971, there was a huge emphasis on it, and they got down around 3 minutes, and then they realized there's diminishing returns. There's not a lot to gain after you get down to your changeover time to 1 minute, 3 minutes. But if you think about it, so from 1950, 45 or 50 until 71, again, that's 20. The secret was 20 or 25 years of hard work in many cases. There was no secret one thing they did other than continuous effort, continuous improvement, continuous attention to detail. And a lot of the topics were like that. I kept looking, come on, where's the magic dust? Where's the silver bullet? It's got to be there, right? And I never found it no matter how hard I looked. It's not there. What there are a lot of good things, though. And that's what I hope to present and share with you, a lot of the sample good things that Toyota did early on. And I hope that even one of them resonates with you in your situation, okay? That's my hope or goal for the day, that even just one thing, if you can take out of this, whether I change your thinking a little bit or give you an idea to research one thing or an idea to trial one thing, that's my personal goal for this. The truth is the original spirit of Toyota actually does come from the founder, an impressive man named Sakachi Toyota. And he's the type of person you'd read about in history books in Toyota if you were in junior high school studying history or something like that. At a point in time, he was considered one of the top 10 inventors in Japan. No longer is, because electronics and things have come along and things have changed. But again, during his era, and even recently as a couple decades ago, he was truly viewed as one of the top 10 inventors of all time in Japan. And he had 5 main principles, which again really contribute, I won't read them all, but really contribute kind of the foundational spirit of Toyota in a lot of ways. He was famous. He was an inventor. That is what he truly did. He was a fantastic inventor. He liked to reverse engineer and copy. He took especially European machines and looms and took them apart and piece by piece sketched them. I've actually seen his blueprints that he's done. He was a master draftsman. He could reverse engineer and write some of the most impressive blueprints and drawings that I've ever seen in my life. He was a mechanical genius, in my opinion. He was excellent at reverse engineering. And he dedicated his entire life towards studying these devices called looms for spinning and weaving, taking them apart, and then trying to catch up with European designs, North American designs, and building better looms. And he learned how to automate them. And his huge breakthrough, the one that he's famous for again in Japan, was the 1924, they call it the Type G auto loom, which was a fully automated machine, low capital cost, had this impressive thing called an automatic stop or judoka feature. Because of that, a single person could run anywhere from 24 to 36 machines, control an entire bank, an area about as large as this room. One person could run all the machines in an area the size of this room. It had 0 changeover time on the shuttle mechanism for it. He had 24 technical patents on this machine alone. And the nickname of it in Toyota and in Japanese was the Magic Loom. And he actually sold the rights to it to the Platt brothers in England, a rival company who didn't want this to get out in the market space. They thought it would be a difficult thing to compete against. So the Toyota family fortune came from this, building looms. And he took the money from that and invested it in the car company. But a lot of people don't realize that even before the car company, Toyota was doing elements of TPS or Lean. This is a picture from a museum in Japan. Toyota has a museum, and they show you the early days of their Loom factory. And what you clearly see is in 1927, their Loom factory had a conveyor line and many elements of flow and things that they were just, of course, taking from Henry Ford. There was a Ford plant in Yokohama, and that opened in 1925 or 1927, and all the Japanese went there to study it, including the Toyota family. So this is a clear example of the roots of flow in Japan. It would have been a push system. It would not have been pull, okay? There would not have been standardized work or anything fancy like that, but they clearly had a moving conveyor line and flow production in 1927 in their Loom business. And this is an example of, the 24, a skilled operator could run 36 machines, an average worker could run 24 machines. And those machines, that was all possible because you could leave the machine. You didn't have to watch it run. You could walk away and know that if a defect happened, the machine would automatically stop, and you could sense that and go over and then fix the machine and get it running again. So again, some of the fundamental principles of their system, again, go back, to the 1920s and earlier in many ways. The son of Sakachi is Kiichiro, and he's the one who got tasked with starting the car company. And they formed a division in the Loom business in 1933. They built their first prototype car, again, reverse engineering, existing models in 1935, and started a plant for vehicle production. And Kiichiro, in a lot of ways, is thought of internally, not so much by the external world, but internally, if you read what Mr. Ono has to say and what a lot of people like his cousin Eiji Toyota have to say, Mr. Kiichiro Toyota really was the starting point for TPS in the car business, that he organized the factory flow, okay, eliminated storage, tried to stop overproduction. He had a big, thick document on how he wanted the plant to lay out, flow, and be run. And he's the one who coined the term just in time in 1937. He wanted production to run by the mantra of just in time in 1937. Now, the truth is he doesn't get a lot of credit because it didn't work out well. Just a variety of things happened. That again, it's tough to start up any type of new business. And then on top of that, you put a military dictatorship suddenly in charge of Japan. You start World War II, and everything that Toyota attempted to start was completely ground to a stop. And actually, during the war years, Toyota actually did some military production. You basically had to, or they'd probably, cut your throat or, tell you to go home without pay, because the military dictatorship was telling all the companies what to do in those days. And after World War II, again, the economy was very bad. In Japan, it took a long time to recover, and then even around 1950, they had a major sales slump. 1/3 of the company was let go. So 2,146 employees were let go, and poor Mr. Kiichiro Toyota had to step down and take accountability for that. A very Japanese thing. When the company struggles, the president, the CEO, is supposed to step down and take responsibility. So he did. And again, I admire and respect him for that. But he planted a lot of the seeds for the early inputs to the Toyota production system. Now, most people argue that when TPS really got going, despite all that early stuff, was in the 1950s. And I have to agree, because up until 1950, Toyota was not successful. In fact, they were barely profitable. In a lot of years, they did not make money. Their volume was very low. Their quality was not very good. And it's really during this era of 50 to 73 that I argue that things really got, rocking and rolling in Toyota underneath Mr. Ono, okay? And he has this quote, that when he arrived at Toyota, it was estimated that the average worker productivity was only 1/9 that of the United States, 1/9 that of the car factories in the United States. And he says, as I thought about that, I did not think it meant their workers were doing 10 times or 9 times more physical work than our workers. It was just that our workers had too much waste in their work. So he thought, if I can eliminate the waste in their work, we could improve our productivity by a factor of 9 or 10. And he was kind of gifted at that style of thinking and challenging conventional wisdom. And this is how he got, again, he got started in 1945 and 1955, a series of experiments going on, trial and error, learning by doing, trying to get things to run better from start to finish, and just experimenting with what would come up. Because he knew he could not compete head on with either Europe or North America. They were that smart. They said, I cannot compete with the companies in Europe. I cannot compete with the car companies in North America head on. We must compete in a different way. So their initial approach was to compete on a lower volume basis, lower price products, build in quality, and make niche products that fit the Japanese market, and then eventually export to the United States in areas where they thought they could compete. So they picked and chose very wisely about what they would do. But he was not going to compete on mass production. They just knew they could not compete on a full mass production with Ford, GM, or any company in Europe for that matter as well. Here's an example, again, of what he did, because he knew that this style of production was not working. That this is one of the famous examples where you see all the inventory build up in the middle, and actually behind the machines there's inventory build up as well, and everybody just does their own thing. This was the most un-TPS thing, unlean environment you could think of. You just made as many parts as you wanted to make, and you built up a big bank, and then if you had a big enough bank, you got to take a break. So even Toyota worked like this, I joke, in the 1950s. But he would break these lines down. Ono and some of his people would break things down so you could only flow. See, if you're on the conveyor line, you can only flow one part at a time. You could only work on one thing at a time. They would only release material and schedule enough to make what you needed to make hour by hour, okay, in the beginning. And rearrange the layout so that only a couple people would work in this area at a time, okay, based upon the volume and the amount of work required to support that day's production. And it was phenomenally more productive. When you measured the worker productivity of doing this, it was phenomenally better, and they realized, okay, we're on to something. This not overproducing, this getting to attack time, standardizing work, improving the layout, this kind of stuff is very important. And they needed to make this work company-wide. And simplistically, there was this old slide about 5 ways to increase production. Okay? And they would they would tell the managers and engineers and team leaders, this is how you got to think about it. We have to increase our productivity. Remember, we're only 1/9 or 1/10 of that of the United States and other countries. And we can increase workers, add machines, or work longer hours. But what's the problem with those 3, if that's your strategy? Yeah, cost more. That's money. The only other 2 alternatives you have is to 1, 4, work harder. Does that work for very long? No, it's mainly a recipe for injury, burnout, and a lot of other problems. The only correct answer is, how do you figure out how to eliminate waste and make work easier? Okay? So conceptually they knew what to do, but they didn't have a vehicle. They didn't really have a vehicle or mechanism for how to do that in the beginning. This is 1950s. They later came up with this graphic to help employees understand that, look, what you really have to realize is only a fraction of what you do is value add. There are things in your day, in your normal work, again, not to insult you, that are not value add. The customer doesn't pay us for all this other types of waste. And they came up with, again, in the 60s and 70s, the examples of the 7 wastes. Initially, they didn't have those. But this type of thinking was the starting point in Toyota, but there was no vehicle. There was no vehicle for how to do it in 1951. There was no Toyota Way. There's no book on the Toyota Way. There's no Toyota Kata. Okay? There's no lean thinking. There's nothing out there. And they knew they needed a vehicle to at least get started and build in some stability, okay, into their operations and improve. And the first thing that they really did in the 1950s going forward from a training, development, and implementation point of view are these things, okay, called the Training with Industry classes, TWI. The actual classes were started in 1951 for JI, 1952 for job relations, and 1953 for job methods. And it was rolled out company-wide. Okay? About 10% of the company went through all these classes, rough figure. Everybody in production, everybody in management, and most people in engineering, for example, as well. And it got very good reviews. Employees liked it. Supervisors liked it, engineers understood it, and it made a lot of sense. So I won't go through it because this is a TWI conference, so I assume most of you already know what the contents is, but it's 100% out of the playbooks that you read about in TWI. It's about developing work team leaders, 2 components of knowledge, and three different skill sets, which again can be improved. And the first one, is the famous one, job instruction, how to teach an employee to do a particular job safely, correctly, and conscientiously. And I joke, this is actually the first Toyota Kata. Because do you know what we say in Japanese for this? How to teach an employee to do a particular job? In Japanese, you translate that as oshie kata. Oshie kata, how to teach. So I joke this is actually the first kata in Toyota, just nobody recognizes it's that. It's fancier to use a Japanese word than an English word. Always is, right? But this is an example of a true kata in Toyota, how to teach, and it has specific methods and ways and techniques behind it. And if you haven't taken one before, I really advise you to take one. It's a 10-hour course for the basic. It's 40 hours, I think, to go through Train the Trainer at TWI Institute. And Patrick, who presented this yesterday morning's keynote, is easily probably the best guy in the world to take that class from. I mean, he's pretty humble, and he'll tell you he's got a better sensei in Japan and all that. But frankly, around the world, he's probably the best person in the world to take that class from. So if you ever have the opportunity, please do it. Please do it. It's a very basic process. It's simplistic, but it's beautiful. It's not easy just because it's simple. You got to prepare the learner in a certain way, and there's like 5 key bullet points under that. You got to present the operation in a certain way. Again, there's a kata for how to do that particular way. You got to have them try out the operation in a safe and correct manner. There's 4 key bullet points under that. And under how to follow up, there's again 5 specific bullet points under that. And you could argue in Japanese whether they're katas or wazas and a lot of different things. But Toyota had a very specific view on how you did this. And they started in 1951. And when I joined the company, this is still exactly how training was done. In the 1980s when I got there, everybody still had to work on the line your first month in Toyota. Japanese had to do it for 3 months. They took pity on me and said, "You're not very good at this, so we'll just have you do it for 1 month." So I only worked 1 month on the production line at Toyota, which is probably a good thing for quality and productivity. But I survived, and they actually taught me how to do the job the very first day. Textbook TWI. My trainer stepped me into it, prepared me, presented the operation, had me trying it out, and he left me on his own like 15 or 20, 25 minutes. I don't remember. It went by really fast. And then checked in with me every 10 or 15 minutes and slowly tapered off the coaching. And then, within days, I was 100%, comfortable and capable on the job. And again, there's lots of specific techniques and details behind how to do that properly. It's really simple, but, it takes some technique. It takes some training to get it right. And Toyota took this stuff to heart. This is some of the early, I call the culture and DNA of Toyota. There was no Toyota way back then. Jeff Liker was still, Jeff Liker probably wasn't even born in 1951. I wasn't. I was born in 65. There was no books on the Toyota production system. They just had these TWI manuals in the 1950s. So they did the same thing for job relations, rolled that out. Again, there's a kata behind this, how to handle people, how to handle job relations problems, how to treat people as individuals and have a proper, foundation for good relations to get along with people on a working basis. And by the way, Japanese are just like us. They argue and fight like you wouldn't believe. I lived there. I saw it firsthand. What you read in the newspaper is not exactly true. I mean, Japanese are just, they fight and argue just as hard as any culture, any people I've ever run across. But they also have a skill in handling. The supervisors I worked with are very skilled in handling problems. And my favorite supervisor of all time, sadly he's deceased, a man named Tetsuo Otsuki. I asked him, Mr. Otsuki, how are you good at handling, everybody likes you, even when you're hard on them and give them tough challenges and give them feedback and stuff. Everybody loves you. My secret is job relations. And he was a master at the little details of this class and how to treat people with respect and how to let them know how they're doing, how to give them credit, how to tell them about what was going to affect them, and how to make the best use of their ability. And he's one of my favorite people of all time. Again, I was really sad when he passed away. And the secret behind it, again, is kind of like JI. There's like this PDCA pattern behind it where you learn to get the facts in a certain way. You learn to weigh and decide and think about what your options are and how to go forward. There's not one way. You have to decide as a leader. You take action eventually, and then you check results and see, did it work? Did it help production? What was the effect on the individual? What was the effect on the team? What was the output effect on production? And if you look closely, I mean, there is a PDCA cycle in there. That's planning, that's doing, that's checking, and then follow-up is kind of hidden under there. But again, this is very consistent how Toyota leaders in production and supervision learned to behave in the 1950s. Same thing is true, lesser extent of job methods. The funny thing is about job methods, a couple funny things about it. if you read the textbook, there's an exact paragraph telling you what it is. It's about executing a plan to produce greater quantities of quality products in less time by making the best use of manpower, machines, and materials now available. Well, the Japanese decided that's too long. Let's just call it Kaizen. True story. True story. And it's got a neat, simple approach to it, kind of 4 steps. And this one I actually think was weaker. There's a lot. I won't go into it today. I think job methods could be made a lot better. And truth is, Toyota only did job methods for about 2 years. It was an early part of their basic stability process, and then Mr. Ono personally stopped it. He said, this isn't doing what I want it to. It's not getting the results I want. It is giving us some stability. It is giving us some supervisor capability, but it was not delivering the results he wanted. And he thought it was weak. And I got to agree in hindsight that, the plan, do, check action isn't strong on this one. And the techniques are all just observation-based. And that's the way the designers, I'm not second guessing, the TWI designers had to do it for America and the situation back then. But when you get to Toyota and what Mr. Ono wanted to do, he needed more. He was aggressive. He wanted more. And this is where the famous trainer consultant, Mr. Shigeo Shingo, shows up in Toyota's history in 1955. And Mr. Shingo was actually an industrial engineer, a phenomenally good industrial engineer, that he had this really a good knack of taking industrial engineering concepts and putting them into simple training courses to teach supervisors and teach engineers and teach managers again how to think about improvement. And he had about a 30-year run. It's amazing. He was actually a consultant to Toyota from 1955 until 85. This is from a passage from a book he wrote in around 1980. By his estimation, he trained 3,000 people in Toyota. He visited the company about 3 times a year. I know the person who was his point of contact at Toyota. He came 3 times a year to teach classes at Toyota, but he did that for 30 consecutive years. And these are the exact classes that he taught. There was a class around motion analysis, a class around time study, a class around operational analysis, and a class around process analysis. And it's pretty traditional IE stuff, but he had a really unique, interesting way of putting things together that the average person could understand and relate to, and was very valuable. And Mr. Ono wanted this. If you go, so why did Mr. Ono want this over JM? A lot of that is because of the time study part. JM does not have a time study component to it. And Mr. Ono knew he was going to want just-in-time, tack time, standardized work, things that required a time-based component to it. So that's why he said, okay, off to the side goes JM. To the forefront comes Mr. Shingo, and this is how I'm going to build capability and greater stability into my operations. And it worked. I cannot second guess him. It worked. So if JM works for you, I encourage you to do it. If not, look more into the things that Toyota did. These are example pictures from the so-called P course that Mr. Shingo taught at Toyota, And in some ways, it does remind me of the Toyota Kata. Some ways, you actually see people standing around with their clipboards, asking questions and observing and thinking about how to make it better. It's good stuff. From 1955, the major things in stability that occurred started to go outward. Mr. Ono was so successful. A lot of people forget that Mr. Ono was not president of Toyota. He was not even vice president of manufacturing. When he started, in this period I'm describing, he was 38 years old. Okay? He was just a mid-level manager. So he didn't get to call all the shots. He just was more successful than everybody else, demonstrated better results, and people had to pay attention to him, and he got promoted. So he went out of the machine shops, and then he was promoted to be over these other departments as well. And he did have core disciples. Again, Mr. Ono did not do everything. These are 5 unsung heroes. I guarantee you never heard of them. You'll never run across their names in a book, but these were his right arm, his left arm men, so to speak. And they were tremendously loyal and extremely motivated and talented. They were the people that went out and built in this stability and basics of the initial TPS thrust into the lines and equipment. The other interesting thing that did occur in the 1960s in Toyota that people forget is they did a ton of SPC. They really did true statistical process control. And there was a period, and there's plenty of pictures of it in the history books and the archives, where you can find people doing the the charting on the line, and the upper control limits, lower control limits, the X bar, R bar charts, and making sure processes were technically, statistically capable and in control. And then, of course, if it goes out of control, that immediately triggers problem solving. So some things TWI would fix, some things TWI would not fix. You had to do problem solving. So there was a huge emphasis in the 1960s, mainly driven by Eiji Toyota, Taiichi Ohno's boss, said we must do better statistical quality control. We must be better at process capability. We must do this SPC stuff until it's our second nature, until it's our DNA. And the scary thing is how good Toyota got at this fast. Because by 1965, they were given the Deming Award. This is the only time that the famous American W. Edwards Deming actually met a Toyota person. He came to Japan to award them the medal. There's a famous prize in Japan called the Deming Prize for Quality. And in 1965, Toyota had won that, signifying basically they had caught up with the West in terms of quality control and capabilities. Okay? So a tremendous accomplishment, and again, part of what I call their basic, for them it was part of the basic stability puzzle. That wasn't the TWI part. The other thing that gets neglected, and I hinted about this earlier, are things like setup reduction. There is a technology element to Toyota that is largely undocumented. It's not just magic dust, doing better training, changing the line layout. There are many, many instances in every shop in Toyota, whether it's machining, casting, forging, assembly, heat treat, stamping, paint, plastics, of upgrading technology. And one of the funniest instances, I worked at Toyota, I did not know this. The funniest instance is if you ask, the average person how Toyota got better at die changeover, they said, they did a Kaizen workshop and, did the SMED stuff and got better. And the truth is actually quite different. That in the museum, in the Toyota Museum, you can find out. There's plaques, there's documentation. The actual equipment still works. They can do a demonstration on this. This is in the Toyota Museum, which still has this operating machine in it with something called a piece of equipment from a company called the Donnelly Corporation. And it has this QDC. They called it QDC, Quick Die Change Capability. There was actually a patent on this. And Mr. Ohno saw these machines in 1955 and wanted to buy them, but Toyota couldn't afford it. So they waited until they got some profits and increased their earnings to the point, and then it needed the expansion to justify it. In 1960, they bought 14 of these machines from the United States. And immediately, this was one of the reasons why their die change times came down, because these machines came installed, with a 10, 12, 14-minute changeover time capability. You didn't have to do Kaizen to get them down from 4 hours. They purchased them. And then they, of course, being Japanese, they studied this and reverse engineered it and had their suppliers copy it. And every machine after this came into Toyota with, decreased changeover times. So it is true. The SMED stuff you'll read, the single-minute exchange of die, that stuff is true. But the untold part of the story, which may be the more interesting part to me, is that it's method and technology. They made a 98% reduction in changeover time. A tremendous stability kind of accomplishment over a couple decades, with both technology leading the way and method-based improvements leading the way, which I found quite interesting. By this point, Mr. Ohno is so successful. Productivity is actually by this point caught up to North America. Quality is caught up to North America. They're not exporting a lot around the world yet because they're still a pretty small company. But he is now made executive vice president of manufacturing. So he is now top dog in manufacturing, which to put it in context, in 1960, that was still only their second plant. Kamigo, my plant, that was their third plant in Japan. So even though we have this great, big, huge view, you got to remember when Mr. Ohno got started, he's more like me and you. We had a couple hundred people, a relatively small factory to work with. Toyota today, of course, is a huge company. He probably wouldn't recognize it. He would be shocked how big Toyota was. And from the 1970s forward, this is really when Toyota kicked into high gear, and I'll argue it's no longer basic stability at this point. They are truly starting to build their production system. So the stuff that you read about, the just-in-time, the real just-in-time stuff, the flow, the takt time, the pull systems, the standardized work, the Kaizen, the Jidoka, that really took off in the 1970s going forward. Of course, seeds of it are early, but it really took off in this period. And Mr. Ohno's in his last few years in the company. He retired, 78, I think. And he said, look, you got to realize that this doesn't happen automatically. It just does not happen spontaneously, bottom up, all by itself. That this mindset we're trying to create has to be built into people. We as leaders have to create it. So he had this passage where it's important for employees to look at their work and see the waste, but it's our responsibility as leaders, okay, this last sentence, it's our responsibility. We have to foster the habit employees of trying to change things for the better and give them methods, ways, and tools and techniques to do that. And in the early days, the amazing thing to me, the vehicle was TWI in the beginning. The initial stability vehicle was TWI. It's nothing you're reading about in the textbooks right now. Now, there's plenty of other stuff that Toyota did. Okay, I can't cover it in this short presentation, and I'm not trying to pretend this other stuff didn't go on, but there were plenty of things you had to learn to do to be a good team leader, good work team leader in Toyota, and plenty of training to back it up. And Toyota has a particular view about how you develop leaders in the company. In Japan, it's entirely promote from within. Entirely promote from within. Exceptions exist for bringing people in from the outside, but it's 99% promote from within. So the production managers that I worked with in Japan, by and large, they'd been in Toyota 25, 30 years, and most of them came off the shop floor. Right? So quite a few were degreed engineers as well, but quite a few, the other half, came off the shop floor. And you can imagine what that's like. There's no fooling your boss. When your boss came off the shop floor, okay, and has come up through the ranks for 30 years, you're not fooling anybody. They know their job. They know the job, the person below them, below them, below them, and below them. They know everything about that. And that's very, again, unique to Toyota and very different. That's hard for us to replicate. I don't know how we're going to replicate that in North America and Europe, okay? This is very different. So we will have to countermeasure this and solve this problem in a different way than Toyota, I suspect, okay? But this is one of the problems we have in adopting this method. Or you change your development and training practices and promotion practices in some extent. I'm not sure what the answer is on this one. But then in 1970 is when Toyota realized, and Toyota actually put the words Toyota Production System together. It technically wasn't called the Toyota Production System until the 70s, and they started spreading it outward to suppliers. They started spreading it around the globe as the company got bigger, and more successful. And this was where my role came in, taking it out of Japan, putting it in various plants around the world. And then, of course, the professors, discovered Lean, machine that changed the world, Lean thinking, Toyota way. We've got the Toyota Kata now and other great books. And they're all wonderful books. I respect and admire the people who can write books, because I certainly can't to their standard. But the problem I mentioned that I do have with these books is they're writing about Toyota today. Toyota 2000, 1995, Toyota 2010. And that's pretty hard to copy. The secrets, I think, are how did Toyota start. Most of us are more like Toyota in the 1950s and 60s than we are Toyota today. Depends upon your situation, of course. But the stable base, the stability summary, I'll say that the things that I know Toyota did that worked, and I mimic these at Donnelly Corporation. I'm not just like pretending that this worked for Toyota, therefore it'll work for you. I can personally, with conviction, look you in the eye and say, these are the exact types of things that I did over a 5-year period at Donnelly Corporation, which made us a much more productive, much more quality-based organization, much more capable in terms of supporting our production system, developing frontline leadership, problem-solving capabilities and process control, all the TWI methods, of course, the basics of flow and Jidoka technology. And the thing is, you have to get results. That is so woefully undercommunicated to me in the lean community for some reason. It's not just about the tools and doing fun things that feel good. You must get results. And Mr. Ono actually said this, okay, back through 1950 to 73. He finally let people write a TPS book in 1973. Now think about that. We got all kinds of TPS books, lean books in the world today. In fact, on Amazon, I can't keep track with them. 10 new ones come out every month, it seems like. Toyota had nothing from 1950 until 1973. And in fact, Mr. Ono, kind of stubborn pride, said, I don't want one written. I don't want one written. I want people to think. His greatest fear was that if he gave people a handbook and said, here you go, here's the Toyota handbook, you just take this and go do it, that people wouldn't think. You'd stop the thinking process. That people had to learn by doing. They had to ingrain this in their system in a doing manner. And I think in hindsight he was right. I think in hindsight he was very right. There's a time and place for conferences. There's a time and a place for education, training, all this stuff. But he is right. This is a capability and a skill that has to be developed. And as adults, we learn most by doing. So, final comments that I'll leave you with to reflect upon for this. Guess what? You are the Taichi Onos of your company. Not me, not him. He passed away. I don't work in your companies. You are the Taichi Onos. And remember, he was only one person, middle of his company. He was not executive VP when he started. Not everybody was on board with him. His machines had downtime. He had employee turnover, morale, quality problems. He had every problem that I had at Donnelly, and I'm sure that some of you have in your facilities. So you or somebody like you has to become the Taichi Ono for your company. Okay? Nobody else is going to do it. Be wary of consultants and tools. I'm a consultant. A lot of my good friends are consultants, but guess what? So far, our recipe is not working by my standard. 15% is working, 85% is not working if the Shingo data is correct. So we're not doing something right. I'm part of the problem. Right? Stability, though. I will go to my grave. I guarantee you, I will not change my opinion on this over the next 40 years if I live that long. I will not change my opinion that one of the secret ingredients that Toyota did well is this stuff that I generically called stability, foundation for their production system. This theme of the conference, stability, results through stability, and TWI is a piece of the puzzle. You cannot deny that Toyota did this in the 1950 period, and it made a huge impact on their people, their thinking patterns, their results, and their style of leadership. And other things, of course, like problem solving and technology are fair game in the mix, absolutely. But with that, I would like to wish each and every one of you good luck on your journeys. You were Taichi owner for your situations. I wish you the best of luck, and if I can ever be of help to you, just even answering questions or anything of that sort, please send me an email, and I look forward to hearing your success stories at the next TWI conferences. Okay? Thank you.